the sun. To dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one, only one.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I have Amanda Luzzader, past president of the League of Utah Writers, writer of the year for the League of Utah Writers. Let's see, what else have you done? You've got a lot of accolades in there.
Oh, I'm just a longtime member. Longtime member of the league, so
and award winner and multi award winner. I always got to add that in there. Well, perfect. Thank you so much for joining me this time. After that first interview, we talked a little bit about kind of like your history and things with your writing. We wanted to go a little bit deeper dive. So this time, I'm very curious to know a little bit more about your time as president. But first of all, what was it like to be asked to be president of the league?
well, I was approached by the presidency at the time, which was Irene Hastings, Emily Yonker, and Tim Keller, and they approached me and asked what I would think about being nominated to be the president, and it wasn't something that I ever wanted or aspired to. Like I never had a deep desire to be the president, but when they asked me, I was definitely flattered. But it wasn't something I was sure I would be good at doing, and so I asked for some time to think about it, as I'm sure most people do when they're approached about being president. And I just really spent a lot of time thinking about all the benefits that I had received from the League of Utah Writers. Personally, I was very grateful to have it in my life. And at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom, and so I also had a lot of time available that I knew other people didn't have. And so for me, I just really thought this is a way for me to give back for all the benefits that I've received and to show my gratitude for what the league has done for me. So I did agree to be nominated, and once I said that I'd be willing to do it, I just began to get excited thinking about what could be done, and carrying on the legacy of all the years and effort that volunteers have put forth for the league's behalf, over the previous 79 years. So, yeah, it was, I guess it was mixed feelings. I was very
Mm.
nervous, but also excited and just wanting to do my part to pay back an organization that I'd received quite a bit of benefit from.
I completely understand. Matter of fact, that when I was asked, I kind of went through the exact same process. So I totally understand. I totally understand that. Now, when you were asked, what was your understanding of what the president did for the league?
At the time that I was president, the biggest task for the president was actually planning and carrying out the annual conference. Um, so that was the biggest task, and then the other tasks were holding board meetings, overseeing chapters, um, overseeing kind of the admin side of running a nonprofit organization, and kind of advancing the mission of the league, and um, I guess a lot of caretaking of our members in our organization, and delegating tasks and working with the board to achieve the league's goals. As you know, you don't become president the year you accept, you become president-elect, and that's kind of a training year to work with the current president to discover everything that needs to be done. And you're given, I don't know if it's changed now, but at that time, the president-elect is put in charge of the spring conference. So kind of a conference on a smaller scale to get your feet wet. Um, and and so you have a year of getting more familiar with what the presidency does before you become president and have to do it for yourself. And then after the 1 year presidency, then you would work as past president, which would be a support position for the current president to give advice and recommendations and to teach the things that you had learned about as president. I know it's changed now that presidents serve for 2 years instead of one, and I think that was a great change because you learn so much when you're the president and always think, oh, if I could do that again, I'd do this differently. But then your term is over and you just hope that you can impart that wisdom to the next president. So I think that was a really great move that the league made. I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but when they moved to having presidents serve for 2 years.
Yeah, that's one of the neat things. The league, the second year is actually an optional year
Oh, is it?
if both the president and the board want both agree to have them serve a second term. So if the board wants the president to serve a second term, but the president's like, no, I'm kind of burnt,
Uh-huh.
then there's not a second term.
That would have. I 1 year was plenty.
Right. Yeah.
Plenty for me. So
And it is for
I wanted to do a second year, but I can see the wisdom in having it. So.
yes, right. If it's a good fit and everybody's happy, then they can go forward with a second year, which makes it kind of interesting. It is still true the president elect is over the spring conference. The only difference is because we have more of a retained conference committee, then the president elect isn't so much like starting from scratch they're like, okay, really the president elect's now like, what do I want the theme to be, and who I want the bigger person to be at the spring conference, what logistics, okay, I get to oversee, but they don't have to worry so much about the facility, or some of the basic pieces because the groundwork's been laid, which is kind of neat. Because that was a surprise to me when I first came on. They're like, hey, when you're like, hey, let's do the spring conference, and I remember thinking, how do I do a spring conference? Like I didn't know anything about running a conference, so it was really enlightening. It really was a great training year to go through that, and then to support the current president at the time. For me, it was Chris, to support his fall conference, to see what that looked like before we had to put on a production. So that was really neat to kind of go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
So with the president, I mean, you don't sign up so that you can get a lot of writing done.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think I got any writing done that year.
the being the president of the league is a lot of work. Some people just think it's to, stand there and kind of wave at people and show up to the board meeting and say, okay, let's keep running as usual. There's a lot of complexity to it, to being the president. What are some of the things that you really loved about being president, and what are some of the challenges you had?
What I really love about the year I was president, we had some significant challenges, and people who were in the league at the time are probably aware that there were some controversies during the time that I was president, which was in 2014 to 2015. But even still, even with those significant challenges, we were able to experience a lot of successes. And at our first board meeting, when I became the president, I came with a strategic action plan that had set out kind of the strengths of the league and our weaknesses. And I laid out a number of goals for us to complete in that year, and then some longer term goals for us to try to complete in 5 years. And so the goals I wanted to do in that first year was to increase our membership by at least 10% from the previous year by the end of that fiscal year, to improve our financial base and to establish a savings for the league, and to increase our conference attendance by 25% from the previous year. And we were able to not only achieve all of those goals, but to kind of blow them out of the water. And I'm very proud of that. A lot of people did a lot of work, and it was definitely a group effort. Our chapter presidents really, stepped up and helped make that happen. I'm very proud of that. Um, it makes me happy to think back on how that was able to be achieved, because when I set these goals, I didn't know what challenges I was going to be facing later, shortly after presenting the goals and having them approved by the board. And if I hadn't known what was going to happen, I don't think I would have set those goals. So the fact that we were able to achieve them and even exceed the goals that we had set is just something that makes me very happy. And then the other thing is the conference. I feel like we put on an amazing conference that year. And like I said, back then, we didn't have a conference chair. We didn't have someone over the conference. It was the president that was in charge of it. And so I put in hundreds of hours of work, and I didn't do it alone. Of course, I asked people to help me. I received a lot of help. Tim Keller, who was in my chapter and had been president before and had put on several conferences himself, was instrumental in guiding me and suggesting speakers and so on. And while I didn't get to go to any of the classes myself, the feedback we received about the conference was very high. I don't know if they had done surveys after conferences in the past, but we did a survey asking for feedback, and the feedback we received about the conference was very high, very a lot of praise came from there. It seemed like people really enjoyed themselves. So that's like the highlights of the year I was president. Challenges, oh boy. So the first challenge, I guess, is something that is more personal for me, because like we talked about just a minute ago, is when you become nominated to be president and the board votes on it, you don't become president right after that. There's a whole year when you're the president-elect before you step into the role as president. And I didn't know that my life was going to change substantially in that year. And what happened is that my marriage ended up ending. And so when I became president, I was actually going through a divorce. And my whole life was changing because I'd been a stay-at-home mom, and now that I was getting divorced, I was becoming a single mother. I was having to find a new place to live, find a job, and I'd been out of the workforce for 8 years. And so I think just getting divorced by itself is a tremendously stressful thing. And then to have, having to find a new place to live, having to find a job kind of builds onto the stress. It was just a very, very stressful time personally for me. And I had no way of knowing when I agreed to be the president that those things would happen. And so the time came for me to be president, and a lot of my friends and family were saying, you should step down. You have too much going on in your life. And I didn't want to let the league down. I felt like I had given a commitment to doing this. And so I felt like I needed to make it work somehow. And so I didn't. I stayed with it. And to be honest, if I had known what was going to happen and what that year was going to be like, I never would have agreed to do it. And I in hindsight, I think, I should have given that role to someone else. So, um, so that was kind of like my own personal thing, just kind of bad timing, I guess. And then things just kind of got worse. And this, I don't know that. I don't know that was anyone's fault. It was just kind of circumstances that happened. But we had that first board meeting, and that's the board meeting when I presented my strategic action plan, and the board approved it, and I was just so excited. Despite the personal challenges I was going through, I was really excited to advance the mission of the league and to make a difference for writers in our community, and to hopefully improve on the already great things that the league was doing. And as I was giving the strategic action plan, as I was going over that, I could tell that there was some, I don't know, tension in the room. There were people that were whispering to each other, where there were people kind of laughing inappropriately, and it just felt like there was some, I don't know, like you could sense that something was up. And I had the impression before that board meeting, very first board meeting, and I should say this was my first act as president, was this very first board meeting. It was the only thing I'd done as president. And I had this view that everyone felt the same way about the league that I did, that we all loved the league and we were all, there to support its mission, and was very enthusiastic and excited about the future with the league. And I naively had kind of this kumbaya view of how things would be, and it wasn't that way. There were people that were not happy with the league, and after we finished our league business, we opened it up to issues that the chapters were having. And there was an issue specifically about the nonprofit status of the League of Utah Writers and how that could be used by the chapters for things like grant writing and opening bank accounts. And the meeting got very heated, and it was intense. And we didn't have like Robert's Rules of Order or anything like that set up, and I blame myself for that. It's just something I didn't think was needed. And so the meeting kind of got out of control. And for the board members who were there, and it was one of our most attended board meetings ever. So there was lots of people there. It was like a lot of disagreement and tension, but it really all centered around this issue about our nonprofit status and how the chapters are able to use that nonprofit status. And there were a lot of questions that were brought up, and unfortunately I wasn't able to answer those at the meeting. I'm not an attorney. At that time, at that very moment, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was a writer, and my passion was writing. I didn't know, the legal or technical aspects of these things, and so I asked the board to give me some time to look into it, to see if I could resolve their concerns and address the issues they had. So we held the meeting in Midvale. I live in Logan. So after the meeting, I had to drive home, and I stopped along the way to get some dinner. And I pull into this restaurant, I pull out my phone, and I have a message from one of the chapter presidents. And the message is that she and her chapter have decided to leave the League of Utah Writers. Like before I even got home, that they had held a vote and decided that they were going to leave the league. And it's I tried not to take it personally, because I really hadn't done anything. This was my first act as president, and I didn't have a way of knowing what I'd need to know. I don't know if there's anything I could have done differently, but to have a chapter leave, as the day really that you step into the role of presidency, very much felt like a vote of no confidence. The next day, I received 2 more emails from 2 other chapters saying that they also were withdrawing their memberships from the league, their chapters and their own memberships they were withdrawing, and these 3 chapters were going to start their own writing organization. And I don't have any problem, with other writing organizations. I think the more help writers can get, the better we all are for it. I don't feel that the League of Utah Writers is in competition with other writing organizations, but the biggest issue really was a financial one, because the league had actually had some financial trouble just a couple years before I became the president, and we were still kind of in a recovery mode where we had to be tremendously careful with our finances. And the year I became president, thanks in large part to Emily Yonker's efforts to kind of get the spending under control and to look for new sources of funding, things were finally looking okay, and we were feeling like, wow, we can make some improvements now, and we can have an emergency savings for the league. But when you have 3 chapters leave, which was approximately, at that time, it was a third of our membership, and the league's a nonprofit, most of our funding comes from membership dues. So you're looking at suddenly a budget cut of 30%. It was very scary to me. And like, my first thought is the league's going to go bankrupt. Like, we're going to go bankrupt. And I'm like, this is our 80th anniversary this year. And this is the year the league's going to die, and it's going to happen under my leadership. And no one wants something to end while they're in charge. After that meeting, like, things just kind of blew up, and I was being contacted by chapter presidents and members, and it went from like being this one tiny little issue about how the nonprofit status for the league could be used, and it expanded into like all these other things that had nothing to do with it. Like, people were telling me, I heard that the league got caught embezzling money. I heard that the league has lost its nonprofit status. I heard that the league is being sued, and on and on and on, things that didn't happen. But rumors were starting, and this one chapter that was left was contacting the other chapters and chapter presidents, I'm told. I don't know this for a fact, but trying to get them to also leave the League of Utah Writers and to instead join their other organization. And it just started feeling to me like things were going to fall apart. So that was the second time I thought, maybe I should step down. Just sorry, Jared.
You're fine.
Like, it just felt like maybe it was happening because I was the president, and if someone else were the president, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But it was such a mess, and there was so much stress, and there was so much fear throughout the league that I didn't want to burden someone else with that. So I decided, Amanda, just forget this and do your job. You're the president, just do your job. And part of like what happened was like some of the people who left kind of started harassing me, like calling me and making demands and emailing, and I finally just had to like stop stop looking at and stop replying. And I don't know why. Like, I think people forget sometimes that I was just a volunteer. I wasn't being paid. It wasn't something I wanted. I was just a volunteer. So, we it's been a lot of years now. I don't know why I'm still upset by this. Um, but time passes, and like everything that happened that year, none of it matters anymore. The league is thriving. It's doing so well. And a lot of the people who left have come back. And a lot of the people who were even involved in the decision to leave have come back. And many of them have apologized to me personally and have said that they're sorry for what happened and for specifically the way I was treated. And I just think the world of those people. It's not easy to come back and say, you made a mistake or that you hadn't considered things fully. And so for those people who have specifically talked to me and tried to make it right, I just think, they are the best people. And there's some that who haven't, who I'm still very involved in the writing community, so I see these people quite a bit. And I just think that as writers we need to be careful not to burn bridges, because so much of being a successful writer is about networking and collaborating with other writers, and there's so much missed opportunity that is there. And I feel bad for me, but I feel bad for them too, that these are people now that there's a bad relationship with. So once we just kind of said we're going to move past this, we're just going to move on, we started taking the steps to fix what had happened. So I immediately met with an attorney who provided information and resources for us pro bono. I met with an accountant who also provided his services for free. I'll give a shout out to him, Matt Funk. He later joined the league as a writer himself, and Matt did our taxes for the league for that year and the next year for free, which was very kind of him. And the attorneys and the accountant kind of walked me through making sure that everything was on the up and up with the league, because there'd been so much talk about the league being sued or about losing our nonprofit status. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any hint of impropriety or anything that we were maybe being careless about, or that there was any issue with our money. So besides, the fun stuff of planning the conference and stuff, a lot of my time was spent on the phone with the IRS and on the phone with the Utah State Tax Commission, and finding where our articles of incorporation was, and kind of a lot of admin stuff, which isn't it's not, I think, something that members typically think about, but it's something that has to be handled. And so I was doing a lot of cleaning up and organizing and putting into place some policies to make that better. And we reinstated a compliance officer to make sure, that there wasn't anything that the league was doing wrong that could jeopardize our nonprofit status or our members. And that was something I think that was really important. So sorry, Jared, that kind of went off the rails, but yeah, it was a challenging year.
I can say this from this perspective, coming up after you, that I can't imagine anybody else have been able to hold themselves together and the league together other than you. I think people would have been either too prideful or too one direction or another, if you know what I mean. I think they would have either fallen apart all the way, or they would have been so prideful that they would have caused bigger problems. I think you were exactly what the league needed, to be honest.
Oh, you're
And
so sweet.
well, well, without your leadership and guidance, even when I was coming up, when I got president elect, I would email whole bunches of stuff. And I don't know if you remember this. Like I would have like all these ideas, and some were wild and some were tame. But then you'd go, "This is what I've learned." And if you hadn't learned those things, if you hadn't been the guiding voice with all the experiences that you had, there's no way I would have been able to be effective at all. Like I would have been kind of okay. I don't think I would have failed as president, but I wouldn't have been as successful without the stuff that you went through and the things that you learned and the things you did for the league. First of all, I don't think we would be here today talking about the league in the way we do without you and the things that you did.
And I don't like want to neglect to say that I received a tremendous amount of help from other members of the board and other chapter presidents at the time, and they did the work. This is when we started going to booths and started recruiting, and we worked on branding so much that year. And we installed a marketing chair. That was something that League didn't have before the year I was president. So we had a chair that was just over marketing for our events, and that was a new thing. So the chapter presidents and other board members did a tremendous amount of work, but they also were a support for me. So at the same time that I was getting kind of this this harassment and negativity, other chapter presidents were emailing me and saying, "I support you. I've got your back." And I think without that, like I would have just given up and just said, you know what, why am I spending hundreds and hundreds of hours for an organization that doesn't want to be helped? So like those board members and chapter presidents that remained, they are to be commended, I guess, for holding together the league. I don't think it was me. I think it was everyone that was on the board at that time. And I kind of wonder like what it was like to be a member of the league and not be involved with the board, like what they had heard, what they knew. After everything was kind of settled as far as the attorney and the accountant advised, like we just said, we're not going to talk about this or dwell on this. And the league was kind of being bad-mouthed, and I was being bad-mouthed in different writing events and places. And sometimes like I overheard it myself, and I just kind of felt like, we're going to take the high road here. There is enough room in Utah, and there's enough writers that there can be multiple writing organizations, and there can be multiple successes, and anything that's helping writers to be better is a good thing. And we always said we would welcome back anyone who wanted to return to the League of Utah Writers with open arms. But I've always been curious, like if everyone in the league was aware of what had happened, or if they had no clue. But it wasn't going to be something that we were going to continue to dwell on. So we had other things, that we were excited about. That year we did a big book drive to collect books. So every time we had an activity, we were asking people to bring in books to donate. And there was a competition between the chapters to see who could get the most book donations. And we were able to collect thousands of books that were donated to a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. And we, for the first time, we wanted to kind of reach out to younger writers, to high school students. And so we instituted a scholarship program for high school youth. And that was the first time we did that. And so we kind of just, stopped concentrating on the negatives and just wanted to go forward with our positives, because there's so much that the league has to offer. And like we mentioned in the last interview, that's the year we started going to booths, when we hadn't done that before. And, we're able to recruit new members who were looking for something to help them with their writing. And I guess one of the amazing things is, even though during the year we lost a third of our membership, by the end of the year we had still met our goal to increase by 10% from the previous year, which means we got a third back plus an additional 10%, which I don't think the numbers matter so much. I think the mission of the league is more important, but it just goes to show, the league has a lot to offer, and can be a good resource for people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do. It was kind of interesting because I actually didn't know that aspect of the league when you had asked me if I'd be interested, like, to be nominated as president elect. I didn't know the history. I didn't understand what had happened because I was fairly new, but I was very active in the league at that moment.
Oh, good. See, that's
And
why I was wondering. I'm like,
yeah,
do people know?
no, so I didn't have a lot of information, and it was interesting because when I became president elect and I had my first spring conference, and I asked a myriad of people to come teach, and I really didn't know history or relationships. I didn't understand, dynamics, and it was interesting because at that very first spring conference, and I thought it was going to be a disaster because I was super nervous the whole time. But every time, like, so many presenters had come up and said, thank you so much for allowing me to present and forgiving me for what I'd done. And I'm like, what did you do? Like, I had no idea that these people had played a part at all in leaving the league or in the hurt feelings and things. And I was unaware of that. But what was really cool is learning later on that these people were coming back and they were like, hey, this is really cool. And I love that they came and apologized to you. That is really cool to hear that story. And also I think it was neat because I didn't know. I didn't have any biases. I didn't exclude anybody because I didn't know. And so I was just going off of merit, and they came back and I thought that's so cool. That was really
And
neat to see.
honestly, like, I don't think anyone did this to be mean or to be spiteful. Like, I think all of us are passionate writers,
Mm.
and they were. I kind of think of them as like dreamers. They had this dream of something bigger, and they wanted to pursue that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Um, I wish it had gone. I wish it had been carried out in a different way. But I don't think that their intentions or their motives were um, anything that was wrong. I think that they did embrace the mission of the League of Utah Writers, but just wanted. I don't know if they wanted to be more involved or if they just wanted something more. So I think that was happen is what happened. And my view is kind of like, it wasn't really about the nonprofit status that was being discussed at the board meeting. Like, I think they just wanted to have kind of a bigger organization, maybe like a nationwide organization rather than a state level. And um, um, what am I trying to say? So I don't think like anyone was bad or evil. Like, things happened
Mm-hmm.
and feelings were hurt, but I don't think it was intentional for the most part. I think most of the people that were involved or that left had the best of intentions. And so that's another reason why those that have come back, and particularly those who apologize, I just think you really are the cream of the crop, and I think we are definitely better for having those people come back or stay with the League of Utah Writers. We are stronger for them, and there's a lot of talent and a lot of know-how, and I'm super glad that you asked them to present at this spring conference and to involve. And I think that was actually a really good move, because that is a way to welcome people back, I guess, is to to have them involved and to use their talents and to share the knowledge that they have.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, to hear all the stuff that you went through, um, boy, it makes my presidency seem pretty darn tame. I'm going to be honest. the No, I definitely understand. One of the neat things that we did put in the Robert's Rules of Order now,
Yes.
because yeah,
Could have maybe saved us a lot of. I mean, it was very heated.
mm,
Uh, I was so surprised by how heated that got. I mean, there was shouting, and yeah, it was intense. And so I think that is awesome that there's some, and we started using some um, speaking, or I should say, meeting rules for the rest of our board meetings that year, but we just didn't have them that year, and that's on me. That was a naive thing for me to think that we didn't need to have some. So I'm glad to hear that there's like formal rules in place now. So,
well, excellent. Jeez, I want to change gears off of that. That's just so amazing. I mean, every time I think Amanda's amazing, I always learn something new, and I'm like, wow, you're even more amazing than I had thought before, which is really
oh,
cool.
you're so nice.
So one other thing I wanted to follow up with the president piece is it's an incredible challenge to go through the presidency, to run the conferences, and then it's a whole unique challenge to find somebody else who's willing to step into that role. I'm just kind of curious, like, what what kind of challenge is that to find somebody to then be asked to be nominated to be president?
Um, I and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, um, following your time as president. But it's very difficult actually, and you have a lot of kind of conflicting feelings, I guess, because on the one hand, like you have this organization that you've taken care of for a year or possibly 2 years, and you want to take care of it. Like it's hard almost to let it go to someone else because you've been caretaking it um, during your time of president. So you want to make sure that it goes into good hands, that it's someone who will take care of it and not let it be harmed, not like it go bankrupt, that will stay true to the mission and the traditions and the history that the league has. But then at the same time, you know that the time commitment and the energy and the problems that they're going to have to deal with are a lot, and you're going to be asking someone to take on a huge responsibility without a lot of thanks. Um, that's so it's kind of like, oh, you want to ask the best people, but you know is going to they don't have any idea, you know, what's coming for them. And so it's about finding someone who has some leadership skills for sure, um, and someone who's passionate about writing and is willing to do the work, because the last thing you want to do is put someone in who won't, you know, step up and 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 do the work for the league, to accomplish goals and to provide a good resource for the writers in our state. So I guess you kind of start with the entire membership of the league, and you start just narrowing it down, like who do we know who's already volunteer time, who do we know who's passionate about writing. Like I for myself, it was kind of just watching like who's been coming to events and is very familiar with the league and is already volunteering their time and is well known in the league. And um, uh, I think for me it was just kind of watching like who could take on that burden. And so Chris Todd Miller was the president after me, and I feel like he did a great job. I think when I was the president, there was still kind of a lot of maybe some uneasiness because of what happened at that first board meeting, and there was some contention between different chapters. And when Chris Todd Miller became the president, he kind of had a unifying effect, I think, and being able to make the chapters be able to come together as one organization again. And I think every league president has their own unique strengths, and they all bring something different to the league. Like you, Jared, you had so many connections in the community and you had such big ideas. And I just remember listening to you talk and I'm like, wow, this is very, very cool. All the new places that the league was going to go. And I'm kind of getting off topic. What was the question? How do you pick the chapter?
Yeah,
A league president.
yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, though, is it's also not that easy to get a president because I don't know that a lot of people would commit to doing that much work without, monetary compensation. And I don't feel like the league president really gets that much in return. It's a lot more giving of themselves than that they receive. So that kind of narrows it down too, just like who would be willing to serve in this position.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things is in that exact same vein is sometimes finding or filling board positions. It kind of comes into that same who's qualified, who's willing to volunteer, what resources do we have. It could be a real challenge. And what I discovered under my presidency was that sometimes I had the wrong people in the wrong spots for board positions, which could be really, really harmful to the league and not know it at first. You're like, these are really good people who have the skills and they're even in the right jobs, and then they don't do well.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's kind of heartbreaking. But then I'm like, okay, how do I let somebody go from the board who needs to be replaced, who's already volunteered time because they're not effective? It is so tough to pick somebody to be a replacement for the president, which is an even bigger, right? Because you can't just say, hey, 6 months into the presidency, yeah, it's not working out. We're going to go ahead and replace you with this other person. You're like, that would be really tough.
Luckily, I don't know of any presidents that have needed to be replaced.
Thankfully. Yes. Hopefully this never happens. Hopefully it never occurs.
Knock on wood.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a problem during my presidency too. Is the president can't do all of the work, obviously, so you have to delegate to board members, and we would delegate positions out, and things would be going great, and then suddenly you start getting phone calls like, oh, this chapter didn't get their split report and this didn't happen, and you start trying to contact that board member and suddenly like they've just disappeared. They're not responding to phone calls, they're not responding to emails, and you're like, what happened? Are they in the hospital? Like where'd they go? And they're just gone. And to have a well running organization, you kind of have to have everyone doing their jobs, and that's why it's so wonderful that there are people who are willing to volunteer their time and in some cases a lot of time, uh, to sustain this nonprofit organization. Because and I don't know if this has changed, but at the time that I was president, there's not a single person who was being paid, not a
Yeah.
single one. No one received anything. The year I was president, we wanted to start giving back to our volunteers because we recognized the enormous amount of work that went into running this nonprofit organization. And so we instituted into our constitution the policy that board members and chapter presidents would always receive a discount or free admittance to the league conferences, and that other volunteers would also get a discount, because before that, people would volunteer, but they got nothing out of it, other than, I guess, the joy of doing service for an artistic organization. But even still, even with giving discounts and things like that, like volunteers are really what make our nonprofit organization successful. And I do hope that maybe at some point in the future that we would become sustainable enough that we could pay, a small staff or something to do some of the critical work that has to be done, so we're not relying on volunteers who might get burnt out or overwhelmed. But you have to start somewhere. And so there is this reliance on volunteers, and it is really difficult finding the right people, because everyone's busy, and they're, we're all writers, so we're all working on writing, and to ask someone to send out membership emails and to handle finances and to coordinate booths and do marketing and help plan conferences and stuff. All of that's a lot of work, and you don't know, like, a lot of people are so willing to help, but they don't even know what it's going to be like. And I don't think anyone intentionally takes a position and then just kind of purposely stops doing their job. I think it's a lot of being overwhelmed or other things in their life comes up. But I would say that's a challenge in finding the right person. And then if there is, like you said, someone in the position and they're not doing their job, it's like, oh, I would never want to be the boss because I don't want to ever fire someone. But how do you, have changes that are good for the league without hurting someone's feelings? And that's a difficult balance that the president has to handle. Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer to that. We kind of just stumbled through my years.
Well, and you're exactly right. Unique challenges for each president. There were a couple of times where I'd put people in positions where they were good friends of mine. Like they were good writers. I had great contact with them. I thought they're very capable, and then I put them into those positions, and then they disappeared. And then when I would get a hold of them, they're like, "Oh no, I'm totally doing this. No, I'm still totally into it. I'm like, no, like I try to give them outs, so I didn't have to replace them, under a less comfortable situation." There were a couple of times where I had to replace people who didn't think they were doing a bad job, and that was the hardest. That was the hardest, heartbreaking, and I did tragically damage some friendships that way, but it wasn't, and it was because it was bigger than me and my friendships, right? The organization needs to have what it needs to succeed, and I can't say, well, my friendship was definitely more important than this huge organization that a lot of people rely on to develop their skills. So that was hard. It's hard as president, and some people, I really hope that this interview helps kind of enlighten them to learn a little bit more about what it's like to be president. And each one does have challenges. I'm excited because I intend to interview Tim Keller. I intend to have Chris, I've started with Johnny. I'm really excited so people can get a better understanding of what it's like.
Yeah. I think almost you have to have been president to know what's that like, because it's the president who really and not wrongly so, but kind of all the responsibility and all the blame and the praise like goes to. And I have watched, I have observed other presidents, receive treatment, unfair treatment, and things like that. And I really empathize with them because I know what that's like to be attacked just because you are the president, and I feel very badly that happens. I think the league members could go a lot farther in recognizing the sacrifices that a league president is making, and I think if there was more kind of a joint effort to make improvements, and instead of to just point fingers of blame, to say what could I do to help, instead of to just make complaints. I think that would be beneficial, but at the same time, like I recognize that there have been like legitimate issues that deserve complaint, that needed to be improved, that needed to be fixed, not just in my year, but in other years as well. But if there could just be a little bit of understanding, that we are all volunteers, everyone on the board's a volunteer, and we're doing the best that we can. It would be helpful, I think, for the league and presidents to just have a little bit more understanding that we are people too. We're human. Yes, we're flawed. But I don't think any president, just neglects their position. I think every person that's filled that role has done the best job that they are able to do.
Absolutely. Well, perfect. I do have a bunch more questions, but I think we'll actually save them for the third interview.
Yeah, sorry.
No. You are fine. This was amazing as always. I do love talking with you and hearing more about your experiences and your points of view, which I put very highly, and that's and partially I'm a little biased because you were the one that decided to pick me to to be nominated for leadership, and that's meant so much to me personally. I mean, sure there were struggles, but overall, like what it's allowed me to do, I mean, my gratitude can never be big enough for what you do, what you've done, what you continue to do as an example. But I'm excited for the third interview, where we'll talk a little bit more about other aspects and other pieces. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry for getting emotional.
No problem. Not a problem.